Well, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. We're now learning that Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has stated that the Ukrainian government is attempting to conceal the situation that its troops in Kupyansk and Krasnoarmeisk are facing at the moment. Peskov has claimed that Kiev has blocked media access to areas where Ukrainian soldiers are reportedly encircled by the Russians, rejecting an initiative from Russian President Vladimir Putin to allow reporters into these locations. Putin had earlier stated that Russian forces would not oppose foreign, including Ukrainian media, visiting the encircled areas. The Russian Defense Ministry has confirmed that it is preparing to suspend fighting for 5 to 6 hours and provide safe corridors for journalists to visit Kupyansk, and Dimitrov has also assessed the situation and spoken about the safety of these journalists as well on the moment of their exit. Meanwhile, in response, Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Georgy Tykhy has warned that Kiev would consider such visits by foreign correspondents a violation of Ukrainian law. With us on the broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. He's a professor of international relations joining us from Minneapolis. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. At the outset, I wanted to understand from you, on one hand, we are witnessing airstrikes targeting energy infrastructure, power grids as well on either side of the border. But on the front lines, Russia is now claiming to have an edge and has claimed to break through Ukrainian defenses in some key cities as well. How do you read into what's happening on the ground?
Well, I think there has been a lot of adaptation on the Russian side. They're no longer engaging in meat grinder tactics reminiscent of the First World War. They have small infiltration groups now. They're really targeting right behind the front lines, line of contact. They're targeting the Ukrainian drone infrastructure. They are really beginning to defeat the Ukrainians, not just on the strategic sense of knocking out their energy infrastructure and things like that, but actually winning on the front line. It's not to say that there have been any major breakthroughs yet. There haven't been, but these are early days in terms of this new operational and tactical approach, and it's beginning to pay dividends. And Russian forces are advancing in Kupyansk, around Pokrovsk more broadly. So with respect to the journalists, it could be either or, just operational concerns or legal concerns that are keeping journalists up, but also might be about controlling the narrative and not letting the world see that the Russians are making these adaptations and achieving these limited victories on the battlefield.
Speaking of the limited Russian advance that is taking place on the ground, we know that winter is on the anvil. How do you think the climatic conditions could then impact what the Russians are doing?
Well, it's the autumn that's problematic because that's when General Mudd has his say. But during the summer and during the winter, the ground is relatively firm. And one of the things about winter, of course, is that, and this is true in the fall and summer as well, if it rains or if it snows or if it's foggy, this does further undermine Ukraine's drone capabilities. Drones don't operate well. They don't see well when it's raining or snowing. So that might be a Russian advantage as well. Russia uses drones as well, of course. But the advantage would fall to the Russians. And at least mythologically, Russia likes to fight in the winter. That's their A game, as it were. So I think as the ground solidifies, this is going to enhance the ability of the Russians to prosecute the war in these new operational and tactical ways.
Moving away from the front lines, we've seen that Ukraine had struck Russia's Black Sea port of Tuapse. It had, in fact, managed to successfully hit an oil tanker there as well, and the Rosneft oil refinery. We already know that the Americans have placed sanctions on two of Russia's major oil firms. And we're also now learning that the oil refinery at Tuapse has halted processing crude oil. Thereby, this will, of course, have an impact on the supply chains. What is your assessment of what's taken place and the implications of that, especially for the Russian economy?
Right. I mean, it's the Russian sale of oil on the global market to various marketplaces is financing and sustaining the Russian war effort. And if that were to be curtailed significantly, seriously, whether through sanctions, primary and secondary, or whether through strategic strikes against Russia's energy and oil infrastructure, that would hurt the Russians. That has not happened so far. Those two Russian oil firms that have been sanctioned account for about 50% of Russia's sales on the open market globally. American sanctions are a little ambiguous. It's not clear that there's secondary sanctions that will kick in. It's not clear that China and India, for example, will curtail their purchases of this oil. And Ukraine's military strikes against Russia's oil infrastructure have been important narratively, but not significant or determinative in terms of Russia's ability to finance the war. The damage that's done is often repaired quickly. It's not as serious as as the Ukrainian press would make it out to be, and the Western press as well. So the Russians are still in a position to hang in there for the foreseeable future.
All right, so requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking some other developments, this time from within the United States of America. We're now learning that the U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments today on the legality of U.S. President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs. This case is a major litmus test of Trump's executive authority and could have far-reaching implications on the global economy as well. The court will consider whether President Trump's use of a 1977 law to impose tariffs on nearly every U.S. trading partner has exceeded his presidential authority or not. Now, the legal challenge against Trump comes from businesses and 12 states, mostly Democratic-led, who claim that the tariffs are illegal. Lower courts have earlier ruled against Trump, stating that the tariffs go beyond the said law's intended purpose to address national emergencies. Trump has meanwhile pushed back, arguing that the tariffs are essential to U.S. economic and foreign policy and has urged the Supreme Court to maintain them. If the court rules against Trump's policies, his administration is expected to explore other legal avenues to maintain them. Moreover, this case also raises questions about the scope of presidential power at large. We do know that conventionally a U.S. president has to go through the U.S. Congress and the Senate in order to get these tariffs accepted and enforce them. The Justice Department had earlier argued that the 1977 law, which is called the IEEPA, allows the president to impose tariffs as part of regulating commerce in response to a national emergency. In all of this, it's also important to note that as per the most recent data released by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, the IEEPA-based tariffs have generated $89 billion in estimated collections between the 4th of February and the 23rd of September. But we all know that it is the people, the American people, who pay for this through increased prices. Still with us on the broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. How do you see this playing out? Because we do know that the U.S. Supreme Court at the moment is conservative leaning. Of the 9 judges who are there currently, 6 have been nominated by a Republican president and 3 by a Democratic president. How do you see this panning out in the hearing? Will they go by the rule books? How could they interpret this? So
don't always break down.
Yes.
Don't always break down on a 6-3 basis. Often it's 5-4. So I wouldn't read too much into the fact that 6 were appointed by Republican presidents. Secondly, lower courts have been finding that Trump has exceeded his constitutional authority under the major questions doctrine. Big questions cannot be decided by the executive branch, by the president. They have to be decided by Congress. And Congress passed this law in 1977 to curtail presidential authority, which had been growing since 1917 on the Trading with the Enemies Act during the First World War. It had metastasized in all sorts of ways presidential power, and Congress stepped in and said, no, we're going to put this International Economic Emergency Powers Act in place, which requires the president to declare an emergency. It was in the context of the Cold War, which meant the real adversaries were communist China and, of course, the Soviet Union. And it was about sanctioning them and dealing with threats that came from them. It wasn't about tariffs, and it wasn't about Trump's tariff war. So if I were a betting man, I would put a lot of money on an outcome that was opposed to the president's use of tariffs and that declared them illegal and unconstitutional and forced the president and his administration to find some sort of legal workaround. I don't think they have much skating room when it comes to that.
Indeed. So you're, of course, betting against the Trump team over here. What are the implications if the Supreme Court does rule against Trump's tariffs? We do know that he's imposed rather steep tariffs on several of US's most prominent trading partners.
Well, they'd be declared void, null and void, and wouldn't have any effect. As I said, I imagine that the Trump team will look for workarounds, ways of keeping the tariffs in place without relying on that particular law. But I don't think there's much scope for that. And so the tariffs would go away. And ideally, Congress would stop abrogating it, or it would live up to its responsibilities, let's put it that way, step in and declare these tariffs to be unlawful and to prevent Trump's team from coming up with some kind of workaround. The Congress has abdicated its responsibilities in that respect for a long time now and can't even end the shutdown in the US. So I'm not hopeful there. But the courts, lower courts and now the Supreme Court, I think will put an end to this tariff madness.
All right, so with that, I'd like to thank you for taking out time, of course, sharing your insights, your analysis with us on News.